Shin Godzilla is nothing if not polarizing. How does this reimagining fare against the other reimaginings? Find out this time on Fusion Patrol Reviews. The Godzilla franchise has bounced back and forth between artistic allegorical work to mindless child-pleasing monster battles. Sometimes villain, sometimes anti-hero, sometimes hero. You never really know what the next Godzilla film holds in store. In 2016's Shin Godzilla, the entire Godzilla canon is jettisoned in favor of a completely new start. The film presents us with a rapidly evolving, radioactive aquatic creature that starts causing havoc in the waters around Tokyo. The destruction ramps up as soon the creature becomes amphibious and makes landfall, and later finally becomes a variation of the Godzilla we all know and love. Shin Godzilla seems to be a love it or hate it film, with some of the criticism of this film being aimed at the emphasis on the response to the emergency rather than the battle against Godzilla itself, and the therefore relatively little screen time the Big G gets. It's definitely here that I part ways with those critics. I immensely enjoyed this film, and I'm firmly in the love it camp. Half of the fun of this film is the satire of Japanese politics and culture. The meetings, followed by more meetings, side meetings, and even sub-meetings ad infinitum. The need to change uniforms or meeting rooms to observe the correct protocol. The irony that the Japanese can, at the drop of a hat, form teams and new government units to increase the bureaucracy to look at the problem, but are completely unable to form an actionable plan in response to the problem. The legal wrangling over the wording of the country's constitution as to whether they're legally allowed to do anything at all. The catastrophic loss of life and property because of their risk-adverse policies. And finally, the comical reliance and formality of routing all decisions through the Prime Minister. These all present laugh-out-loud moments if you can see the film for what it is, a solid return to the allegorical roots of the Godzilla franchise. While the original Godzilla film was about the horror of the atomic bomb, in this film, Godzilla is rather more an allegory for the 2011 Tohoku earthquake and tsunami, the resulting Fukushima nuclear disaster, and Japan's inefficiencies at responding to these disasters. All of this satire squarely hits the mark, and I can only imagine it even more effective domestically. At the other end of the spectrum, the film also has its thoughts on the United States. The criticisms of the U.S. are largely a reverse of the ones leveled at Japan. The U.S. is a unilateral, risk-taking, quick-to-act, poor team player that bullies the UN to get their own way, and is not at all shy about dropping a nuclear bomb on Tokyo. It's somewhat rare and refreshing that the film manages to portray their actions at opposite ends of the spectrum, and still manages to make it clear that neither are desirable modes of operation. Moderation between extremes. What a concept. Well, these are completely fair criticisms of the United States, because the Americans are, for the most part, not actually in the film. The satire directed at them is less well realized, coming as it does in announcements of what the Americans are doing, rather than direct action. That is no doubt intended to show that the Americans are aloof, distant, and expecting Japan to hang on their every word, but it just doesn't work quite as well in my mind. But what about the King of Monsters himself? At the risk of sounding like a film school student, the Big G is more symbolic than in any prior Godzilla film. In this new version, Godzilla starts out unrecognizable and has one completely unique and new ability not present in the prior films. This Godzilla adapts incredibly rapidly to any change in conditions or threat. It makes him the exact counterpoint to the Japanese responders' inability to be flexible and adapt to rapidly changing conditions. But it also means that the final form Godzilla achieves is a direct result of his adaptation to the humans he interacts with. Rendered in CGI and constantly changing throughout the film, Godzilla looks different, and it's certainly not to everyone's liking. But his massive rampage through the wards of Tokyo are impressively realized. Long gone are the days of a man in a rubber suit crushing a model city. In the end, the film becomes rather like a Japanese Independence Day, when the battered but resilient Japanese implement a meticulous plan that requires both worldwide international cooperation in the scientific, manufacturing, and military realms, and it leads to Japan, with the military backing of the US, executing what stands as my absolute favorite military attack on Godzilla ever. In fact, one of my least favorite parts of many other Godzilla films is the ubiquitous roll out the tanks, ships, and planes and shoot impotently at Godzilla until he burns them to slag bit. And while that does happen in this film, it's a critical plot point, and the humans learn from it, setting up the final confrontation. A confrontation that had me cheering out loud as I watched. I will say this, I will never look at a bullet train the same way again. Turning to the filmmaking. This film is visually wonderful. From the sterility and utility of the many, many meeting rooms to the visuals of the destruction wrought by Godzilla, the film looks great. For me, the culmination of the visuals is an epic realization of Godzilla's first use of his atomic breath that stands above anything that's come before in a Godzilla film. I can't say enough good things about the look of this film. The film's score is odd. It's a bit schizophrenic. The new material ranges from driving rhythmic drums, guitars, and synths to operatic. And then there is the liberal use of Akira Ifukube's original Godzilla scores from the 50s and 60s, which is always welcome in a Godzilla film. But in this case, in addition to some new recordings of the material, the original recordings, with all their audio issues, are used. The older recordings do jar a bit to the ear. The film gives us a few hints at directions of a possible follow-up movie. At one point, a further disturbance is mentioned on an island, hinting at another monster, which is completely dismissed. The end credits prominently feature Rodan's theme from a King Ghidorah film, and in the final shot we get a hint of what Godzilla's next evolved form might have been. Unfortunately, with the rights tied up, Toho is currently unable to start making any more Godzilla films until 2020 at the earliest, and the current word is that they're thinking of taking a different direction, something more akin to the Marvel Extended Universe. Still, the film stands well on its own, and if there are no more films in this Godzilla incarnation, it will remain a standout entry in the Godzilla series by itself. This has been a Fusion Patrol review. If you enjoyed this content, you might want to check out our weekly podcast, where we take a look at and discuss individual episodes of cult and obscure sci-fi TV series. You can find us at fusionpatrol.com, on iTunes, or mostly wherever fine podcasts are found.